In the land of Belias, a grand duchy in the northern region of the empire, the tale begins with a young noble lady seated in a carriage, lost in thought about her impending marriage. Today, she is to wed Grand Duke Barris Valias, a man revered as a war hero yet equally feared as a ruthless murderer. But who is this enigmatic figure she's bound to? At just 9 years old, Barris buried his father with his own hands after a devastating battle. For 2 years, he toiled in secret as an orphan, working alongside the very man who had slain his father, all the while plotting his revenge. When the time came, Barris took his vengeance, earning a reputation for dishonor that he cared little about. For 16 years, he became the Empire's sword, leading them to victory on countless battlefields. Yet, beneath his heroics lies a dark curse. When the full moon rises, he is overcome with a bloodlust that drives him to slaughter without mercy. This earned him the dual titles of war hero and murderer. As Barris stands cold and emotionless on his wedding day, his new bride, Seline, ponders her fate. She recalls the many noble ladies and princesses who vied for Barris's hand, and yet, it was she, a woman with no parents, possessing nothing but her name, who was chosen. Was it her beauty that caught his eye? Or perhaps, a love at first sight? She quickly dismisses these thoughts. How could a man who mercilessly wields his sword be capable of love? Maybe Barris likely desired a woman who would not be missed, for after tonight, he plans to lock her away, confining her within the walls of his estate for the rest of her life. But Seline is no ordinary woman. Our heroine had been regressed in a novel she'd read in her original world and is now frustrated because even her knowledge from the book wouldn't be able to help her take a step outside the bedroom from that day, and she'd only realized that when the wedding ceremony was over and she was awaiting Barris in the room. Filled with frustration, Seline jumps onto the bed, and with her tired eyes she imagines, if she doesn't escape soon, she knows she'll be imprisoned here for the rest of her life. Just then, Barris enters the room and spots his bride lying on the bed, seemingly asleep. Seline, still awake, wonders if the light was somehow his doing and slowly rises to get a better look at him. His expression is stern, displeased, and without much patience, he demands to know what she's doing there. Flustered, Seline quickly apologizes, explaining that she must have fallen asleep and promises to move out of his way. As she shifts to the other side of the bed, she realizes that her escape plan could become much more difficult with the Duke in the bedroom with her. The Duke, without a word, drops the lantern and coldly orders her to sleep. Obediently, she lies down, and for a moment she's distracted by his handsome looks despite his scary looks, and as sleep overtakes her quickly, Barris remains seated on the bed, silently watching her as he clenches his fist. The next morning our heroine wakes up. Not feeling any warmth on the other side of the bed, she wonders if Barris had fallen asleep somewhere else. She doesn't let that stop her from doing her morning stretches, but she notices something as she turns around. Barris was right by the window. Even with his stern look, she can't deny how strikingly handsome he is, especially under the sun. She looks down at the exposed part of her sleepwear and she panics, leading her to go under the blanket. The Duke reflects on how he'd gotten married the day before and how most people were so scared they couldn't even make eye contact with him, and even his subordinates gave him a bad expression, so there was no way he could have a happy marriage. But she'd married a one-eyed man whose nickname was War Demon. The Duke recalls how she'd smiled at him the day before and also how shy she'd looked when she saw him, and in his head he questions whether she isn't afraid of him, and as he remembers how embarrassed she'd looked when she noticed the exposed part of her sleepwear, he thinks to himself that maybe she recognized him as a man, but he just gets up and dismisses it as a useless delusion. As soon as the Duke leaves, Seline gets up and hurries to change out of her sleepwear. Seline thinks of how the Duke was strangely kinder than his appearance in the novel, and she hopes he wouldn't suddenly confine her. As Seline hurriedly slips into her dress, the Duke re-enters the room. He doesn't acknowledge her, instead he moves directly to the bed and without a word, he uncorks a bottle and pours blood onto the sheets, leaving Seline completely terrified. At this point she imagines maybe the Duke intends to perform a sacrifice with her, but his action completely surprises her. He reaches out his hand to her, suggesting she gets off the cold floor. After helping her up, he offers to help her get dressed and she accepts. Remembering the very big, thick manly hand that just held hers, she couldn't help but blush, but it's completely different for the Duke. He reflects on the small white, skinny arms that feel like it'll break when it touches his. As the Duke pulls the strings of her dress, the head maid comes in to assist Anna with getting dressed. The Duke thinks, my hand feels empty, if I lock the door and lock her in then she won't slip through my hands like this, right? After ordering the head maid to prepare a meal for Seline, the Grand Duke leaves the room. The lingering scent of blood makes Seline uneasy, so she opens the windows slightly to let in some fresh air. As she gazes out, her expression softens, lost in thought. Though she managed to survive the night unharmed, her mind drifts back to the original novel where Seline had fainted before the banquet, only to be imprisoned soon after and Regressed declared retirement to focus on agriculture, but in truth, he spent his days in the Grand Duchess's room. No one showed any sympathy for the terrified 21-year-old, who couldn't even look into their eyes. Seline tries to look on the bright side and or unlike in the novel she hadn't been immediately imprisoned, but this isn't enough hope for her. She might miss out on the chance to escape forever if she misses that day, but the thought of going back to a snowy country unprepared weighed heavy on her heart. The Grand Duke stands outside listening and without hesitation he immediately kicks the door open to find her near the window. He wonders if it isn't cold for she had come from the warm southwest and he wonders if she maybe liked the chilly weather there. Seline hears the sound of approaching footsteps and turns to take a look only to find the Grand Duke standing. The Grand Duke asks if she wasn't hungry because he heard she didn't have lunch and she immediately recalls something funny. She suddenly bursts out into laughter leading the Grand Duke to guess maybe she liked to be asked whether she was hungry. He reflects on what the head maid had told him, that he had never had the chance to meet women, having been on the battlefield from a young age. Though he had attended numerous victory balls hosted by the royal family, he had never spoken to anyone. Whenever he made eye contact, the women looked at him with fear and quickly avoided him. Seline tells the Duke she'd like to go outside and immediately panic sets in, the thought of her being locked up for insolence, but the Grand Duke extends his hand forward, definitely different from what she'd expected, and says, if you want to go, you should get up. As they walk down the hall, Seline finds it difficult to walk due to her uncomfortable dress. The Grand Duke stops and folds his arms, sending her straight into panic mode, while the Duke recalls how his assistant had told him it was considered courteous to offer his escort when a woman is dressed uncomfortably. The Grand Duke thinks, we may not yet be on friendly terms, but now Seline and I are married and unlike others she doesn't seem afraid of me, so what's the point of all this, he thinks, turning away. She's just a woman brought here for knowledge. I don't understand why I'm so cautious. I could just imprison her. From tomorrow onwards I wouldn't let you set foot on the grassy grounds. As Seline tries to keep up she trips and luckily the Grand Duke catches her. She's distracted by the sturdiness of his thigh while the Grand Duke compares her waist to the weight of a rabbit. And before winter comes I should feed you a lot to make you chubby, expand the tapestries in the room and add another layer to the fireplace and another layer on the windows, and let's make sure you can't leave. In the original novel, Regressed was a man who lived and died without knowing love, lived a lonely life all his life, and in the end he dies without realizing that he's lonely. So pitiful. The other Seline was imprisoned and had Stockholm Syndrome, and she surely fell in love with Regressed at some point, but unfortunately to Regressed she was just a woman who would birth his child, which was sad, but she finally realized why Seline had opened up her heart in the novel. When she was about to fall he suddenly ran up to her with a surprised expression and held her firmly with his arms, and at that moment she could feel his huge thigh and chest and especially the strong scent of his perfume on the back of her neck. The Grand Duke extends his hand forward and asks if it wouldn't be better to just slow down and walk steadily, even if it's not as fast, than to walk to the point of stumbling, as he asks her to hold his hand. As she steps out into the snow her breath forms brief white puffs, vanishes almost as soon as they appear. She calls it a truly magnificent sight and walks happily while the Grand Duke thinks, the scenery is still unimpressive because it's far from being warm. What do you like about those desolate fields and branches? She looks at the Grand Duke smiling brightly, and the Grand Duke just quickly looks away, hiding his red cheeks. I don't think you'll ever like this again, maybe because he plans to lock her up. Seline recalls how she used to imagine working in Hollywood when she used to be in the theater, and as she looks at the Great Wall ahead, the thought of her having to live in a locked room for the rest of her life without being able to return to Korea comes to mind, and her face quickly turns pale. She questions what the use of the scenery is for, since if she wouldn't be able to escape, she at least wishes she could grab the Grand Duke's heart. The Grand Duke wonders why her expression suddenly changed, and as he pulls her arm he wonders if she was suddenly struck with the realization that her husband was that monster. Seline looks at the Grand Duke and he tells her he'd be going in, and as he walks he wonders why Seline didn't let as little as scream out. Seline calls him back and asks if he could lend her his arm. He thinks to himself how one could sometimes feel down from staying in a cold place for a long time, plus her stamina will run out quickly, so she could collapse from exhaustion on the way. The Grand Duke imagines Seline almost collapsing while he helps her up as a gentleman would. Barris ended up unsatisfied, and he reflects on how she'd acted like she was going to collapse at any moment, but she was walking well. They get back inside, and as she takes off her cloak she wonders why the Grand Duke wasn't saying anything again and thinks to say something to lighten the mood. Seline finally speaks, telling the Duke how much she'd enjoyed the scenery. "You sound comfortable taking a walk. Isn't this woman afraid of me?" "Wait, obviously I was planning on locking her in the room as soon as I brought her in, but how did this happen?" the Grand Duke questions, and as he looks at her he thinks it's because of those icy blue eyes, because when he looks into those eyes it keeps feeling like he's being swayed by her. He quickly reminds himself not to forget the initial purpose, and she just needed to give birth to a child, if so even that day. She calls his name with a bright smile on her face, and he thinks she's tired, so they'll just do it the next day before saying goodbye. After a snowy night she wakes up the next morning with sunlight streaming on her face. A maid greets her and she tells her she didn't have to greet her like that, and the maid tells her everyone will greet her and treat her like that. Seline lets out a sneeze before informing her that she'd grown up as a commoner, so she wasn't familiar with etiquette and she still didn't know how to respond in any situation, so she could help her out. The head maid just looks at her thinking for a while before finally suggesting she have her breakfast. After having breakfast, Seline lays on the bed full with nothing to do when a thought strikes her. No one told her not to leave the room, and at that time the novel Seline had been imprisoned, but she wasn't yet. She decides to go out for some fresh air and to avoid a chance of getting depressed from only staying in the room, but there's a problem, as the moment she pushes the door open she spots Anna in front of her asking where she was going. Trembling she admits, "I'm outside, inside makes me feel trapped, I'll be depressed." She turns her head and finds her lunch. Anna asks how she'd like to eat it. Seline tells her it will be difficult to take it out, and Anna wonders if the Grand Duchess was really looking forward to the outing. There is a table in front of the corridor having lunch there, might give a picnic vibe, Anna says, which instantly cheers Seline up. As Seline sits with her meal she struggles as she tries to decide what tableware to use first, while Anna looks at her thinking she was yet to decide what and how much to teach the Grand Duchess, and it was just as the Grand Duke had said, there was no need to teach her anything if she was only just going to live in his inner city as a woman for the air, but looking at the day before's event and the present day that didn't seem to be the case. Anna reflects on how, when she cleaned the sheets, she noticed the blood was from an animal. The Grand Duke must have shown this to the maids of the outer castle as a countermeasure against gossip about the lack of a consummation. Could the Grand Duke have really done something so thoughtful? She finds herself wondering, could it be that my lord has suddenly gone mad? Yet one thing is clear, the Grand Duchess has had some influence on the Duke's actions. Perhaps she might be the seed of hope for the north and stop the Duke's rampages. Seline calls Anna and asks her if there's anything she should know since she'll be going outside the castle, and Anna informs her that she'll go with her. A new scene appears. The Grand Duke seems to be faced by a great confusion. He needed a reason for locking her up, although he tried to do so for no reason. "Doesn't it seem like I'm treating her like an object? I brought her here for that sole reason, and I know I seem like a hypocrite, but I still need a reason." As he recalls her beautiful smile, he admits he doesn't want to treat her like that, but as he walks to the window in frustration something catches his attention. He sees Seline outside, walking with Anna. As they turn to leave the castle, panic seizes him. The Grand Duke assumes she's trying to run away, and even though Anna is with her, he worries. What if Seline slips away in a crowded place? And without hesitation, he rushes after them. Outside, sits next to a fountain rethinking the usefulness of the original novel because unlike the novel Barris was quite kind. She recalls how he'd lent her his arm the other night and her cheeks immediately turned red, but that didn't last at all. She also recalls his cold gaze and her expression immediately softens. That's right, let's not dream for anything. I can go for a walk without being locked up right away, but his nature still hasn't changed and still I want to get along well with Barris. Seline looks up at Anna standing and immediately invites her to sit, and as Anna does so she spots a familiar figure hiding. A few minutes ago in the castle, the Grand Duke hurried down ignoring everything in his way. His thoughts are I want to grab her right now and throw her into the bedroom. The Grand Duke finally gets to her and wonders why he hadn't considered that Seline was just an average person with no sense of humor and there was no way she could escape from the eyes of Anna who had risen to the rank of Royal Knight of the Empire. He signals Anna to keep going and as they walk he thinks, if you see her trying to run away, catch her and tie her up. I just needed a good reason, so this is a good opportunity, or there may be other things to find fault with. Only looking at Seline, the Grand Duke wonders if she isn't tired of staying still like that and what the point of coming out is if she just sits around, or perhaps she could be checking her escape route in advance. The Grand Duke reflects on how Jared must have done all the work and comes out of his hiding, and a commoner who recognized him greets him. His eyes immediately to his trembling hands, and as he looks away he thinks the Slayer who is said to be worse than a demon is your monarch, so even though you're safe you'll be scared to see me right in front of you, but what's more important now is to not lose the Seline you have. Later, as Seline enjoys her refreshing bath, she hears a knock on the door and immediately responds. To her surprise, the person who walks in is none other than the Grand Duke. Embarrassed, the Grand Duke immediately leaves, reflecting on how he'd thought it would be time to wash up and eat and even brought a present. She probably doesn't like me already, but she will hate me even more now, the Grand Duke thinks standing outside when Anna appears and asks what's wrong. Inside the room, Seline sits on the floor helpless, hoping he wouldn't decide to lock her up after her insolence. As she sobs on the floor, she hears someone call her and a pair of manly places a cloth on her and says your body will get cold. Seline thanks the Grand Duke for being kind to her and in his mind he freaks out but still manages to stay composed. I'll be outside, so call me when you're all dressed up and let's have dinner together. Finally, they sit together and Seline couldn't recall a scene like that ever appearing in the novel, so she wonders if it could be that he was waiting for her to make a mistake. The Grand Duke's expression remains hostile as ever while Seline wears a bright smile on her face. The Grand Duke is shocked and wonders if Seline is truly human, since no one could dare to do that. How can you put your hand on my body as if it's nothing? You're just trying to distract me from you, right? As if I was the only one who felt strange and regretful. The Grand Duke brings out the present and when she opens the box her eyes light up as it meets the beautiful ruby-like necklace in the box. She asks him if she can really take it and he says yes. She covers her mouth thinking Barris may have given her a gift without much thought, but that was the first time she'd ever received a gift from a man and she didn't know about anything else, but she knew that Barris is trying to be nice to her, so maybe she could really get along with him. The Grand Duke's thoughts are always different. I told jewelers and pawn shops the serial number of your items. If someone comes and sells it, play dumb and issue a bill for 1,000 gold. I said that if you come to the castle and hand over the goods, you will be rewarded handsomely. Then if you catch Seline trying to sell the goods and run away, the rest is easy, you just have to think of her as an object without hesitation at first. Just get her caught, then from that day on you will cry every day. Who else thinks it would be fun if they could hear each other's thoughts? The next day as Seline steps out of the castle, the Grand Duke watches and smiles thinking everything was going just as planned, but he suddenly grabs his coat and scurries out. His assistant reflects on how at the age of 9 the Grand Duke had disguised himself as a war orphan and entered the enemy's camp, and after 2 years his body became a mess and he came back after circling the enemy's neck, but after recovering he went to war again at the young age of 13, and since then he'd never seen his master in disarray up until that moment, but he was glad spring had finally come to him. As the Grand Duke watches Seline, he wonders what she was doing purchasing apple and grilled chicken on skewers since they won't help her escape. As the Grand Duke fumes with anger, he doesn't notice the people behind him and instead he wonders when Seline would finally show her true colors. He notices her small handbag and suggests to himself she buys something sturdy and can carry a lot of weight, and when she reaches the shoe spot he wonders if it would be that time and agrees she needed shoes she can run well in, low heel and also sturdy, but she just leaves the shop without buying anything. The Grand Duke stands frustrated wondering what she'd come out to buy and if she really was only going to do that, why she'd gone out as soon as she heard about his past. She shares the chicken with Anna and smiles so bright that it makes the Duke question how someone could smile so brightly, and even though he didn't take his eyes off her for a single moment he still didn't have a clue as to what she was laughing about. As Seline enjoyed the chicken skewers, a cold wind blew through making her shiver. She instantly remembered how much warmth the Grand Duke had provided her the day before and also the firmness of his hand that never failed to bring a smile to her face. She reflects on how Barris's loneliness was predetermined, but she was also lonely in Korea, and no matter how much she thought about it, maybe there was a reason why they both met and became a couple. That night, the Grand Duke goes to her room with another present, this time with a blue ribbon attached to it. He stops to take a look at the present, and the next time he looks up he sees Seline discreetly come out of her room and he wonders if she was going to be escaping this time. The Grand Duke secretly tails behind her, and as she fixes her hair he wonders if she was trying to impress someone. The Grand Duke realizes she was in front of his room, so he hurries back to her room and makes use of her room's balcony to get to his room. He opens the door letting her in, and as he stands, she signals him to come sit beside her, and at first he maintains a distance but later goes closer. Seline brings out the apple she'd bought at the market and says they should eat it together, and when he takes a bite she just smiles. The Grand Duke tries to figure out why she was smiling and if his face was strange while eating an apple when she speaks, apologizing for laughing, saying she didn't mean to look. She looks at the difference between their bite sizes and says it's amazing he can eat that much in one bite. The Grand Duke looks in confusion, but everything about you is small, not even your bite, not even your height, not even your face, not even your hands. His cheeks turn red as he think underscore the other place too. He gets up and brings out the gift he prepared earlier. She looks at it, her eyes lighting up, and she asks if she can try them on. Without hesitation, he kneels down in front of her, gently taking her foot in his hands to help her remove her shoe, and as he holds her leg, he can't help but think how small and delicate she is, while she, in turn, marvels at how big and strong he is. In no time he gets it done and he asks if it fits her well, and she just laughs. The Grand Duke wonders what is wrong with her since she just kept on smiling and not doing anything. Pull yourself together, he says, now that you have comfortable shoes you're definitely going to run away, right? But running away to the cold north where you have no connection, does that mean you hate me so much that you'd rather die? And you're laughing like this, but you're still going to run away? Seline suggests they continue eating and he agrees and goes to sit next to her. She moves closer to the Grand Duke and in his mind he wonders what she could possibly want from him and also why she kept on looking at him and laughing. The Grand Duke imagines her falling asleep and clenches his fist as he asks, "Are you perhaps planning to spend the night here, Grand Duchess?" So he suggests she leaves. The Grand Duke stands frustrated thinking, I was ready to treat her as planned if she escaped, but if she really did, it seems I won't be able to contain my anger. He turns to find her cloak on the chair and thinks, I don't know what I want to do with that woman anymore. Seline closes the door in confusion, her mind reeling. Nothing was unfolding as it did in the novel she had read, she still hadn't been imprisoned. Reflecting on all that had happened, she sinks to the ground in defeat. Did you really not feel anything at all? She murmurs, her voice trembling. I just want to hug you, kiss you, or even hold your hand. I don't understand. Tears well up in her eyes as she spots the shoes he had given her. She remembers a saying from Korea, when you give someone shoes, the receiver will run away, and she wonders if this gift has the same meaning there. I guess we're not compatible, so you're telling me to leave, right? She asks sadly. The next morning, the Grand Duke's assistant, Jared, rushes in with urgent news. They had found a man the previous night from a village called Kimmelin in the southwest, who claimed he was searching for his fiancée, Seline, who had disappeared. Jared explains that the man said they hadn't officially married yet but had promised to. The Grand Duke asks if the ground was starting to warm up, leading Jared to innocently wonder if he was planning to bury her, and when Jared confirms that spring had indeed begun 2 months ago, the Grand Duke simply responds, "I expected that, since she's beautiful in my eyes, she will be in others too. It's my fault for finding her late, isn't it? It's a crime to be so pretty." The Grand Duke asks where the man is, and when Jared replies that he's in the dungeon, the Grand Duke remarks that the man must be quite bold to come all this way for love, and he decides to see the man for himself. Meanwhile, in the countryside, a man with green hair informs another about Seline's engagement. Shocked, the man asks for more details, thinking how a life of elegance would suit her better than anyone else. But one thought troubles him: was she really happy? Desperate for answers, he pleads with the boy for more details, but the boy knows little, leaving the man no choice but to travel north. Back at the castle, a man is dragged into a cage and beaten. The Grand Duke stands before him with no sympathy, ordering his men to proceed. Despite the man's pleas for mercy, they force a strange liquid down his throat. The Grand Duke coldly inquires if he and Seline were lovers back in the countryside. The man, remembering Seline's delicate face, admits they loved each other and had promised to be together forever. The liquid, Abel Anon, is a truth serum that compels the consumer to speak honestly. As Jared quietly follows the Grand Duke, he is ordered to release the man into custody and adjust the escape route to pass through the terrace next to the inner courtyard. While Seline enjoys a walk in the garden, she turns around, and the Grand Duke, standing nearby, feels as if she's looking directly at him, but he dismisses it as his imagination. Fascinated by her, he thinks about how others must feel the same way when they see her. He imagines that if she hadn't been sold into the hands of someone like him who wasn't even a father figure, she could have spent time with her loved one. If she had been born into a noble family, she would already be married, and what kind of face did she make when meeting that bastard? Enraged, he contemplates how he should kill the man in front of her eyes, and how brutally he should do it so that she wouldn't look his way again. If by some chance she's even slightly missing him, then I'll grind his bones and scatter them as food for the beasts. Seline suddenly appears before the Grand Duke asking how the shoes he got her looked on her, and though he knew nothing about fashion, he could tell that neither the dress nor the leather shoes suited her. He asks if they're comfortable, and when she says yes, he thinks that comfort won't matter if she tries to run, as it won't be enough to escape the castle, and once again, she surprises him by asking if he'd like to go out with her that day. He asks where she'd like to go, and she replies that anywhere is fine as long as they're together. But the Grand Duke informs her that he'll be closing the castle, so she should stay in his inner city. Seeing her sparkling eyes, he explains that it's due to work and won't last longer than a week, and after that, they could go horse riding together. Seline feels relieved, at least confinement wasn't starting yet, while the Duke thinks that perhaps, from that day, Seline might resent him for the rest of her life, but that's okay since he has no intention of sharing her with anyone else. Even if you only felt empty, sad, and depressed because of me, even if your heart is tiny, you shouldn't turn your heart towards another person, especially not with that scoundrel alive, maybe after seeing him die right in front of my eyes. As they speak, the man from the dungeon appears in the garden. Seline tells the Grand Duke that she can't ride a horse, wondering if it's really true that all women there could. The dirty-looking man calls her name, saying he'd worked so hard to come all this way just to meet her, and now she won't even look at him. Seline wonders if he's a servant, trying to recall if he had ever appeared in the original novel. She hides behind the Grand Duke, and the man pleads for her to at least say a few words to him, but she remains silent. Frustrated, he yells her name, and she asks the Duke who this person is. He tells her that he had heard the man was a lover who had promised a future with her in his hometown, but Seline remains confused. The Grand Duke recalls how he had initially thought she wanted to stab him in the back to protect her lover when she suddenly went behind him, but instead, she hid behind him to avoid the man, which was the same as choosing him, and she didn't seem to have any affection for the stranger. The Duke orders the man to be taken away, and Seline drops to the ground, feeling something is terribly wrong with the situation. Honestly, if Barris knew about my past. If I were to put myself and that man together, he would have already buried him, but this kind of situation is not something that would ever happen. She remembers how the Duke mentioned closing the castle gates and wonders if he was really trying to test her. Seeing Seline on the floor, the Grand Duke kneels down, asking what's wrong, and she asks him what all of this is about, and he wonders if he had made a mistake. Seline asks if he was planning to send her to that man, and he denies it, saying he'd never thought of such a thing. She calls him a liar, and the Duke clenches his fist, finally admitting that the man had asked him to allow him see her face just once, and when he looks up to continue, he stops as his eyes meet her hostile gaze. Seline angrily asks if he's going to do that for everyone who asks to see her face, and the Grand Duke explains that the man had claimed to be her lover. Seline asks if he'd just blindly believed that and arranged for them to meet inside the castle, and he tells her all about the truth serum. Seline wonders if that guy was truly the real Seren lover, and if the Duke was so indifferent to her that he wouldn't mind her meeting with her ex-boyfriend. In a new scene. As Jared watches the Grand Duke, he thinks, what a foolish man, not even realizing that he secretly harbors affection for his wife. For several days you've been attentive to the cries of your wife echoing through the door. On the second day, as Jared trains, he wonders what kind of man would allow his beloved woman to meet her ex-boyfriend. Later, the Grand Duke paces around the room, and Jared can't help but wonder why he only thinks in negative ways. He approaches the Duke and whispers that it was going around that Seline hadn't been eating well those days, and he suggests the Duke take her some soup. The Grand Duke stands outside Seline's room, holding a bowl of soup, wondering where she was getting the strength to cry day after day without eating anything. He thinks that if she cries like that after seeing her ex-lover, it's obvious who she's crying for, and instead of crying over her ex, he wishes she would cry because she's disappointed in him. He enters the room with the soup, and Seline asks why he's there. He replies that she wasn't going out anyway, and she retorts that it doesn't matter since the castle is closed. The Duke looks at her, reflecting on how even though she wasn't afraid of him, he always felt she was holding back around him, but now she was saying whatever she wanted without hesitation, which was strangely cute. The Duke informs her that he'll open the gates again and reminds her of their promise to go horse riding together. When she asks when, he says now. After she gets dressed, she wonders why the Grand Duke couldn't even ask if she was okay after she cried so much, feeling disappointed in him. The Duke reflects on how he had brought her here without knowing her past, just because he needed a woman to bear him an heir. He thought he had done a good job, but if he had known her past, he would never have brought Seline here. The Grand Duke suggests she take the white horse, but as she looks at the horse's load she hesitates, saying it might feel too burdened if she were to ride on it, but the Grand Duke just laughs, assuring her that it could easily carry 5 women like her. Seline panics, as she looks at the horse, which was very much bigger than her. She gently tugs at the Grand Duke's sleeve, her voice barely a whisper, "I really can't ride a horse." The Duke looks at her and asks, "Would you prefer to learn how to ride first and then go out later, or would you like to ride with me?" After a moment of hesitation, she nods, accepting his offer, and she allows him to help her onto the horse, and they leave together, setting off on their ride. As they ride together, Seline finally feels relieved and also forgets all about her anger, but the Grand Duke just stays silent. He had a problem with how close she was to him and how sweet she smelt and how cute and soft she looked and felt from the back, but that wasn't his problem. Boda Seline and I are wearing riding pants, barely nothing between the thin piece of fabric, her back pressed so close to my front like this, to that place. Later, as Jared prepares to go pick the Grand Duke, Anna appears and he explains that the Grand Duke had ordered him to come pick him up at Lebeleberg in the evening. "You really don't plan on going in the evening, do you?" Anna asks, leaving him confused. "Go early tomorrow morning, you should arrive around dawn," Anna says before turning away. After much deliberation, he decides to go with Anna's suggestion and hopes the Grand Duke forgives him. As the fire crackles between them, Seline says to the Grand Duke, "I'm still cold," and without hesitation he asks her to come closer. He also mentions, "I had arranged for us to be picked up in the evening, but it seems something must have happened. Seline assures him that it is okay with a bright smile, and he nods while commending Jared in his thoughts. After a moment, he asks her if she'd like a drink and then brings out a wine, but she explains that she doesn't like wine because it's bitter. He asks if she'd take whiskey and she accepts. He brings it out and she tells him she'd never drunk whiskey before, and he just watches her closely. She'd definitely said she enjoyed drinking wine in her hometown, and she'd also said she particularly enjoyed the wine from the Raffin region that I just brought out. It was the lightest wine with lower alcohol content. I heard she really enjoyed drinking it. She finishes her drink and he tells her there were many small animals around. He tells her they should have brought a bow along, and he asks if she enjoys hunting. She gazes at the Grand Duke seriously, wondering if they were really going to have their first kiss there. The Grand Duke notices her mood slightly different from before, while Seline just thinks of how she didn't want to have her first kiss right after drinking, but she couldn't help it. Hunting, she says, springing up. She could barely even finish her statement before collapsing, and as the Grand Duke holds her he smiles, guessing she can't drink much. But there was something more serious at hand. From before the wedding ceremony, then at night and the following week, I don't know if it's who, how or why, but Seline has changed, the Grand Duke thinks. He concludes that it was the witch, and it was no coincidence that he'd felt like he was bewitched a few times. As he takes her into the cabin he wonders. If she's a witch, then where's the real Seline? Can I find her? Cold, Serene mutters. The Grand Duke's cheek immediately red. I'm sure Serene also wore a vest, she is even wearing my cloak. How can I feel like this? This woman's definitely a witch, and I don't know whatever you did to me, the Grand Duke thinks. The Grand Duke held Seline on his leg till morning. Yeah, well, so what if this woman is a witch? The invincible witch can devour the empire. At best a mere human like me would be swallowed up, so what's the big deal? Even though anything is better than that woman, I still need to find the real Serene. Jared finally arrives and the Grand Duke places Seline on the bed before leaving. Seline wakes up to the room empty, and as she searches for the Grand Duke, she stops. I was in the north before and after my wedding. Look for a witch or sorcerer. It seems like Seline was replaced on the wedding day, so we need to find the real Seline. Thank you so much for watching this recap. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more manhwa recaps. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. Leave a comment below with your favorite part or predictions for what happens next, and if there's a specific manhwa you'd like to see recapped, let me know. See you in the next video.